The president's reaction to public confirmation of the FBI's Russia investigation. Overview. In early March 2017, the president learned that Sessions was considering recusing from the Russia investigation and tried to prevent the recusal. After Sessions announced his recusal on March 2, the president expressed anger at Sessions for the decision and then privately asked Sessions to unrecuse. On March 20, 2017, Comey publicly disclosed the existence of the FBI's Russia investigation. In the days that followed, the president contacted Comey and other intelligence agency leaders and asked them to push back publicly on the suggestion that the president had any connection to the Russia election interference effort in order to, quote, lift the cloud, unquote, of the ongoing investigation. Evidence. 1. Attorney General Sessions recuses from the Russia investigation. In February 2017, the Department of Justice began an internal analysis of whether Sessions should recuse from the Russia investigation based on his role in the 2016 Trump campaign. On March 1, 2017, the press reported that in his January confirmation hearing to become Attorney General, Senator Sessions had not disclosed 2 meetings he had with Russian Ambassador Kislyak before the presidential election, leading to congressional calls for Sessions to recuse or for a special counsel to investigate Russia's interference in the presidential election. Also on March 1, the president called Comey and said he wanted to check in and see how Comey was doing. According to an email Comey sent to his chief of staff after the call, the president talked about Sessions a bit and said that he had heard Comey was, quote, doing great, unquote, and said that he hoped Comey would come by to say hello when he was at the White House. Comey interpreted the call as an effort by the president to, quote, pull him in, unquote, but he did not perceive the call as an attempt by the president to find out what Comey was doing with the Flynn investigation. The next morning, the president called McGahn and urged him to contact Sessions to tell him not to recuse himself from the Russia investigation. McGahn understood the president to be concerned that a recusal would make Sessions look guilty for omitting details in his confirmation hearing, leave the president unprotected from an investigation that could hobble his presidency and derail his public policy objectives, and detract from favorable press coverage of a presidential address to Congress the president had delivered earlier in the week. McGahn reached out to Sessions and reported that the president was not happy about the possibility of recusal. Sessions replied that he intended to follow the rules on recusal. McGahn reported back to the president about the call with Sessions, and the president reiterated that he did not want Sessions to recuse. Throughout the day, McGahn continued trying on behalf of the president to avert Sessions' recusal by speaking to Sessions' personal counsel, Sessions' chief of staff, and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and by contacting Sessions himself 2 more times. Sessions recalled that the other White House advisors also called him that day to argue against his recusal. That afternoon, Sessions announced his decision to recuse from, quote, from any existing or future investigation of any matters related in any way to the campaign for President of the United States, unquote. Sessions believed the decision to recuse was not a close call, given the applicable language in the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, which Sessions considered to be clear and decisive. Sessions thought that any argument that the CFR did not apply to him was, quote, very thin, unquote. Sessions got the impression, based on calls he received from White House officials, that the president was very upset with him and did not think he had done his duty as Attorney General. Shortly after Sessions announced his recusal, The White House counsel's office directed that Sessions should not be contacted about the matter. Internal White House counsel's office notes from March 2, 2017 state no contact with Sessions and, quote, no comms, serious concerns about obstruction, unquote. On March 3rd, the day after Sessions' recusal, McGahn was called into the Oval Office. Other advisors were there, including Priebus and Bannon. The president opened the conversation by saying, quote, I don't have a lawyer, unquote. The president expressed anger at McGahn about the recusal and brought up Roy Cohn, stating that he wished Cohn was his attorney. McGahn interpreted his comment as directed at him, suggesting that Cohn would fight for the president, whereas McGahn would not. The president wanted McGahn to talk to Sessions about the recusal, but McGahn told the president that DOJ ethics officials had weighed in on Sessions' decision to recuse. The president then brought up former Attorney General Robert Kennedy and Eric Holder and said that they had protected their presidents. The president also pushed back on the DOJ contacts policy and said words to the effect of, quote, you're telling me that Bobby and Jack didn't talk about investigations, or Obama didn't tell Eric Holder who to investigate, unquote. Bannon recalled that the president was as mad as Bannon had ever seen him, that he screamed at McGahn about how weak Sessions was. Bannon recalled telling the president that Sessions' recusal was not a surprise and that before the inauguration, they had discussed that Sessions would have to recuse from campaign-related investigations because of his work on the Trump campaign. That weekend, Sessions and McGahn flew to Mar-a-Lago to meet with the president. Sessions recalled that the president pulled him aside to speak to him alone and suggested that Sessions should unrecuse from the Russia investigation. The president contrasted Sessions with Attorney General Holder and Kennedy, who had developed a strategy to help their presidents where Sessions had not. Sessions said that he had the impression that the president feared that the investigation could spin out of control and disrupt his ability to govern, which Sessions could have helped avert if he were still overseeing it. On March 5th, 2017, the White House counsel's office was informed that the FBI was asking for transition period records related to Flynn, indicating that the FBI was still actively investigating him. On March 6th, the president told advisors he wanted to call the acting attorney general to find out whether the White House or the president was being investigated, although it is not clear whether the president knew at the time of the FBI's recent request concerning Flynn. 2. FBI Director Comey publicly confirms the existence of the Russia investigation in testimony before HPSCI. On March 9th, 2017, Comey briefed the Gang of Eight congressional leaders about the FBI's investigation of Russian interference, including an identification of the principal U.S. subjects of the investigation. Although it is unclear whether the president knew of that briefing at the time, notes taken by Annie Donaldson, then McGahn's chief of staff, on March 12, 2017, state, quote, POTUS in panic/chaos, need binders to put in front of POTUS. 1. All things related to Russia, unquote. The week after Comey's briefing, the White House counsel's office was in contact with SSCI Chairman Senator Richard Burr about the Russia investigations and appears to have received information about the status of the FBI investigation. On March 20th, 2017, Comey was scheduled to testify before HPSCI. In advance of Comey's testimony, congressional officials made clear that they wanted Comey to provide information about the ongoing FBI investigations. Dana Boent, who at the time was the acting attorney general for the Russia investigation, authorized Comey to confirm the existence of the Russia investigation and agreed that Comey should decline to comment on whether any particular individuals, including the president, were being investigated. In his opening remarks at the HPSCI hearing, which were drafted in consultation with the Department of Justice, Comey stated that he had been, quote, been authorized by the Department of Justice to confirm that the FBI, as part of its counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election, and that includes investigating the nature of any links between the individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. As with any counterintelligence investigation, this will also include an assessment of whether any crimes were committed, unquote. Comey added that he could not comment further on what the FBI was, quote, doing and whose conduct it was examining, unquote, because the investigation was ongoing and classified. But he observed that he had taken the extraordinary step in consultation with the Department of Justice of briefing briefing this Congress's leaders in a classified setting in detail about the investigation. Comey was specifically asked whether President Trump was, quote, under investigation during the campaign or under investigation now, unquote. Comey declined to answer, stating, quote, please don't overinterpret what I've said. As the chair and ranking know, we have briefed him in great detail on the subjects of the investigation and what we're doing, but I'm not gonna answer about anybody in this forum, unquote. Comey was also asked whether the FBI was investigating the information contained in the Steele reporting, and he declined to answer. According to McGahn and Donaldson, the president had expressed frustration with Comey before his March 20 testimony, and the testimony made matters worse. The president previously criticized Comey for too frequently making headlines and for not attending intelligence briefings at the White House, and the president suspected Comey of leaking certain information to the media. McGahn said that the president thought Comey was acting like, quote, his own branch of government, unquote. Press reports following Comey's March 20 testimony suggested that the FBI was investigating the president, contrary to what Comey had told the president at the end of January 6, 2017 intelligence assessment briefing. McGahn, Donaldson, and senior advisor Stephen Mueller recalled that the president was upset with Comey's testimony and the press coverage that followed because of the suggestion that the president was under investigation. Notes from the White House counsel's office dated March 21, 2017 indicate that the president was, quote, beside himself, unquote, over Comey's testimony. The president called McGahn repeatedly that day to ask him to intervene with the Department of Justice, and according to the notes, the president was, quote, getting hotter and hotter. Get rid, question mark, unquote. Officials in the White House counsel's office became so concerned that the president would fire Comey that they began drafting a memorandum that examined whether the president needed cause to terminate the FBI director. At the president's urging, McGahn contacted Boente, getting that wrong, several times on March 21, 2017 to seek Boente's assistance in having Comey or the Department of Justice correct the misperception that the president was under investigation. Boente did not specifically recall the conversations, although he did remember one conversation with McGahn around this time where McGahn asked if there were any way to speed up or end the Russia investigation as quickly as possible. Boente said McGahn told him the president was under a cloud and it made it hard for him to govern. Boente recalled telling McGahn that there was no good way to shorten the investigation, and attempting to do so could erode confidence in the investigation's conclusions. Boente said McGahn agreed and dropped the issue. The president also sought to speak with Boente directly, but McGahn told the president that Boente did not want to talk to the president about the request to intervene with Comey. McGahn began McGahn recalled Boente telling him in calls that day that he did not think it was sustainable for Comey to stay on as FBI director for the next 4 years, which McGahn said he conveyed to the president. Boente did not recall discussing with McGahn or anyone else the idea that Comey should not continue as FBI director. Number 3, the president asks intelligence community leaders to make public statements that had no connections to Russia. In the weeks following Comey's March 20, 2017 testimony, the president repeatedly asked intelligence community officials to push back publicly on any suggestion that the president had a connection to the Russian election interference effort. On March 22, 2017, the president asked Director of National Intelligence Daniel Coats and CIA Director Michael Pompeo to stay behind in the Oval Office after a presidential daily briefing. According to Coats, the president asked them whether they could say publicly that no link existed between him and Russia. Coats responded that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, has nothing to do with the investigation, and it was not his role to make a public statement on the Russia investigation. Pompeo had no recollection of being asked to stay behind after the March 22 briefing, but he recalled that the president regularly urged officials to get the word out that he had not done anything wrong related to Russia. Coats told this office that the president never asked him to speak to Comey about the FBI investigation. Some ODNI staffers, however, had a different recollection of how Coats described the meeting immediately after it occurred. According to senior ODNI official Michael Dempsey, Coats said after the meeting that the president had brought up the Russia investigation and asked him to contact Comey to see if there was a way to get past the investigations, get it over with, end it, or words to that effect. Dempsey said that Coats described the president's comments as falling, quote, somewhere between musing about hating the investigation, unquote, and wanting Coats to, quote, do something to stop it. Dempsey said Coats made it clear that he could not get involved with an ongoing FBI investigation. Edward Giustaro, another ODNI official, recalled that right after Coats' meeting with the president on the walk from the Oval Office back to the Eisenhower Executive Office building, Coats said that the president had kept him behind to ask him what he could do to help, quote, help with the investigation, unquote. Another ODNI staffer who had been waiting for Coats outside the Oval Office talked to Giustaro a few minutes later and recalled Giustaro's reporting that Coats was upset because the president had asked him to contact Comey to convince him there was nothing to the Russia investigation. On Saturday, March 25, 2017, 3 days after the meeting in the Oval Office, the president called Coats and again complained about the Russia investigations, saying words to the effect of, quote, I can't do anything with Russia. There's things I'd like to do with Russia, with trade, with ISIS. They're all over me with this, unquote. Coats told the president that the investigations were going to go on and the best thing to do was to let them run their course. Coats later testified in a congressional hearing that he had never felt pressure, that he had, quote, never felt pressure to intervene or interfere in any way and shape, with shaping intelligence in a political way or in a relationship to an ongoing investigation, unquote. On March 26, 2017, the day after the president called Coats, the president called NSA Director Admiral Michael Rogers. The president expressed frustration with the Russia investigation, saying that it made relations with the Russians difficult. The president told Rogers, quote, the thing with the Russians was messing up, quote, his ability to get things done with Russia. The president also said that the news stories linking him with Russia were not true, and asked Rogers if he could do anything to refute the stories. Deputy Director of the NSA, Richard Leggett, who was present for the call, said it was the most unusual thing he had experienced in 40 years of government service. After the call concluded, Leggett prepared a memorandum that he and Rogers both signed, documenting the content of the conversation and the president's request, and they placed the memorandum in a safe. But Rogers did not perceive the president's request to be an order, and the president did not ask Rogers to push back on the Russia investigation itself. Rogers later testified in a congressional hearing that as NSA director, he had quote, never been directed to do anything he believed to be illegal, immoral, unethical, or inappropriate, unquote, and did, quote, not recall ever feeling pressured to do so. In addition to the specific comments made to Coates, Pompeo, and Rogers, the president spoke on other occasions in the presence of intelligence community officials about the Russia investigation and stated that it interfered with his ability to conduct foreign relations. On at least 2 occasions, the president began presidential daily briefings by stating that there was no collusion with Russia, and he hoped a press statement to that effect could be issued. Pompeo recalled that the president vented about the investigation on multiple occasions, complaining that there was no evidence against him and that nobody would publicly defend him. Rogers recalled a private conversation with the president in which he, quote, vented, unquote, about the investigations, said he had done nothing wrong, and said something like, quote, the Russian thing has got to go away, unquote. Coates recalled the president bringing up the Russia investigation several times, and Coates said he finally told the president that Coates' job was to provide intelligence and not get involved in investigations.